All right, everyone, it's 9 o'clock, so let's call the meeting to order. This is our April 26th, 2023 meeting of the Brown Ranch Annexation Committee. As we always do, we're going to go around and give introductions for everyone, not the public, but all the staff and committee members. So I'm Jason Lacey, third-party facilitator.
Jason Beasley, Executive Director of the Yampa Valley Housing Authority.
Robin Crossan, City Council President, and Gail Gary will be joining us shortly, sitting next to me today in Joella's place.
Okay.
Kathy Meyer, Yampa Valley Housing Authority, member of the Board of Directors.
Michael Marchand, filling in for Leah Wood, I'm the Vice Chair of the Housing Authority.
Gary Suter, City Manager for the City of Steamboat Springs. Michael, now I know why you had to leave the EDC meeting. You must be going somewhere important.
Yeah.
There it is.
Right. Robin, could you introduce yourself?
Oh, yeah, Robin Shepard with the Annexation Committee.
Okay, Dan?
Dan Foote, City Attorney.
Emily Katzman, Yampa Valley Housing Authority Development Project Manager. Rebecca Bessie, Planning Director.
John Snyder, Public Works Director. Matt Barnard, Parks and Recreation Development Manager, Acting Director in Angela's absence.
Tom Mason, Deputy City Manager.
I'm Jamie Malone from the Police Department. I'm sitting in the Chief Executive.
Okay, thanks for being here. Okay, we always start with approval of the minutes, which of course are the video minutes. We also have the meeting summary from the April 12th meeting. Those are always good to read. But could I get a motion to approve the video minutes from the April 12th meeting?
So moved.
I'll second.
Motion by Meyer and a second by Suter. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, passes unanimously. Item 2 on our agenda is the follow-up to our discussion from the last meeting on city services, operations and maintenance responsibilities. And we focused on public safety a lot in that meeting on police and fire. Did anyone have any follow-up? I know we don't have an annexation draft yet today. We're going to see that at the next meeting, but did anybody have any follow-up comments, questions, concerns based on that discussion from a couple weeks ago?
We have an update. So we talked a little bit with our board about the land dedication requests.
Okay.
For the
Station.
for the station, for the first responders training facility, and for the 46-acre regional park. And then also we talked a little bit more about how to meet the sort of parks expectation in the Proster plan. So we're working to provide the adequate space needed for the fire station. Our engineers are working with Chuck on basically exactly what that layout might look like, so we can provide the right amount of space and kind of tease out exactly that it truly is the right amount of space, if that makes sense from a design standpoint. Utilizing the site across the street as an example. We're also worked quite a bit on updating the parks plan. And so we've shared that with the Parks Department just yesterday. And so we've upsized the amount of parks that we're providing to right around 70 acres that meets the level of service standards. We're waiting to get a little bit of feedback from them, just any little tweaks that we might need to make. All told, there's 70 acres of parks and 125 acres of open space. So that's 46% of the annexed parcel. And then we also had a fairly lengthy discussion at the board meeting about the 46-acre park and the public first responders training facility. Both of those were something that the board did not support providing land dedication for, primarily from the standpoint of the opportunity costs that it presents to the housing authority and our ability to deliver on our mission, which is to house the workforce and residents of our community. So as a recap, the 46-acre regional park more or less takes up the entire west neighborhood D of the plan, which would be 500-ish units. And there's a similar, probably 100 or so units lost for the training facility. So from that standpoint, the housing authority was not supportive of working on land or exploring opportunities to deliver land to the city through a dedication on those two items. So that is the main update.
Okay, and then as part of the housing authority is going to provide a draft and comprehensive annexation agreement in 2 weeks.
Yes.
And you'll incorporate all these pieces into that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're working on finalizing that right now. We've been having a lot of internal meetings to just make sure we're all consistent across that. That information later today will be going to the fiscal impact analysis folks so that they can incorporate all of those assumptions into the fiscal impact analysis. And then one other item is that we are also soliciting feedback from the folks that have expressed interest in being our developer partners. And so we'll be looking to get comments back from them prior to submitting it to you so that we can have some feedback from folks who would be on the execution side, just to make sure that we understand if there's any areas that maybe we didn't think about, or
Sure.
areas where we could add more clarity or something along those lines. So that our goal is to get that to everyone a week from today. So that would give essentially a week worth of review of that document, which is, I don't know, 17, 18 pages. It's going to be dense.
And when you say to everyone, do you mean you'll send it to staff in a week or you'll
To the BRAC.
to the whole BRAC?
Yep. And so there's particular components of that we're working with staff on, like alley language, as an
Yep.
example. Some of the exhibits related to the Parks and Rec land. And so we're working with staff on a few of those items, but primarily the goal is to get the document to draft in a draft form to BRAC, and that's sort of the starting position where we can then work on, this is spot on, this is not, we need to move this or that around.
Okay, great. Any questions or feedback for Jason on that update?
We had a very lengthy conversation last night. But before we would really go into it, I'm hopeful that Matt can share from Parks and Rec view what, from the conversations that were had internally with all of you and the different A, B, and C exhibits, that Parks and Rec has come up with some additional ideas that have incorporated what the Housing Authority has worked through. And I don't know that you guys talked through that the other day or not, or whether this would be new information.
The email with what Jason's talking about right now came in right before we sat down in an executive session last night, so I hadn't even seen that information when we spoke in that session last night, so I do need to kind of just process that and compare it back to like the table, so I can't really speak to what you said.
Yeah.
I just,
And we weren't expecting you
Yeah.
to respond to it today. I just wanted to give an update as to kind of where we were. And know that like we're going to be working kind of over the next week with our staff to sort of hone that in, hopefully. And then that'll be an exhibit to the annexation agreement.
Well, I'm hopeful that we can have a conversation today then about what Parks and Rec was, what we discussed last night, so that you could take that into consideration before putting something in black and white.
Well, if you have feedback, now's the time to share it.
So Matt, do you want to, can you pull this up and go
Yeah.
through it with us?
While Matt's doing that, for your information, I believe that both RCLCO and EPS are working with public safety, with the police department on their assumptions. So I know there's some discussion going on with that as well. Got an email from Kim Weber saying that they were looking at the projections from the police department. So I'm not sure where that's at, but that's being worked on as well.
Any update on the timing of when we might, we're going to try to get the annexation draft to us with a week's advance notice. Any chance the fiscal impact model could be given with as much lead time as possible? Do we have any idea on the timing on that?
We'll know more about that this afternoon.
Okay,
We're meeting with Dana Shelley from our CLCO this
Right.
afternoon to kind of talk about that, get her the sort of base set of assumptions that she needs. But it's my understanding that they're considerably further along in sort of I wouldn't say finalizing the analysis, but just like having the assumptions set, and then it's just a matter of moving some levers and should spit out what the answers are.
I just think as much lead time as possible on that, the better.
For sure.
It's gonna be really important. So. Okay,
So obviously, we were aware of your interest in only doing whatever's necessary for fire and police for a station. And we're all in on whatever that acreage is what that acreage is. You know, however you all work together to figure that out, whether it ends up being 2 acres, 1.2, or somewhere in between. You know, we know you're going to work together to get what's best for that. We're also not happy, but we'll put on the back burner the training facility for the time being, understanding that the number of units that we would potentially lose is very important, obviously, to the whole plan. We are not interested in giving up 46 acres. But we have some ideas on that too, as to where it could potentially go. And one of the locations would be outside. So we would like to work diligently with you to find the 46 acres somewhere in the plan. Whether it's 12 acres in one location for a sports barn and a balance for fields, or however we can make it work so that we have acreage for the future. We understand the parking and the transportation and try and find a location that will work for everyone. And we're really looking outside the urban growth boundary to possibly find land that way to do it off of 42 as opposed to off of 40. So it will be easier for folks to come and go, as well as everyone from the community to get to a location. So that's something that we would like to continue to work on with you.
okay.
All right.
Robin, I have a question about the need. I understand the community need for a regional park. Do we have land, or does the city have land out by the airport?
There is, we talked about this last night as well, John.
There is a triangle of land off of that gravel road that goes on the north side of the runway to where that old farmhouse currently sits. Let me see how big it is though.
It doesn't show it. I looked at it last night. It's just consolidated into another parcel. It shows it as 91 acres, but that's not right.
How much?
You can do a takeoff.
It shows it as 91 acres, but it's just
91?
consolidated with some other property, so that's not an accurate number.
Okay,
All right, I'm just,
yeah,
I'm
oh,
looking
we,
for,
yeah,
okay,
absolutely, and we are too. We are.
all ideas are good ideas. at this
Absolutely.
point. Okay.
Right, yeah, we talked about, you know, if there's land someplace else, then the housing authority could possibly work on getting donated and then deed it over to the city so that we could build a park there. You know, we understand we'll be responsible for the build out of the regional park. But at the same, you know, what Leah had said about, you know, whether it's 2 acres for fire or whether it's 8 acres for something else. And that you are interested in, the community understands how much that's costing. We want the community to understand as well that if we're putting X number of $1 million into a park, that it's for the whole community, that it's also being built specifically for Brown Ranch because of the need. We might not be building a park, whether it's at the airport property or somewhere else, if Brown Ranch wasn't happening. So we want to make sure that we're equitable when we talk about who's giving what.
So is the thought on the 46 acres that you would be comfortable with that being either on-site or off-site?
We would discuss the offsite, absolutely.
Could be outside the UGB.
Exactly, and we're okay with that.
Did you talk about, given the acreage that we're talking about here, did you have any conversations about reducing the open space and increasing the park space, or no? Okay.
No, well, we understand that open space is gonna be a situation, and we pretty much, whatever ends up being open space is what's gonna be open space.
Mhm.
Because we can't pull 1,000 acres out of the hat.
Right.
We're not going to, we
Yeah,
all
we'll never
recognize
reach that, yeah.
And so that's kind of like wherever we can do open space, great. But the point is, we're very concerned about not having the space for regional park.
Yeah, we-
A few,
We'd be happy to kind of explore.
keep looking at it.
Yeah, we understand that's a concern and a desire from the city. I just want, I guess, make it really clear that we are providing 70 acres of parks that meet the level of service standards identified in the Proster plan, which would be way more than you would see in any other infill development in the city. And so we, from our position, we see the 46-acre park as a want, not a need from the community standpoint.
Right. And Robin, did you want Matt to go over this?
Yeah, do you want to just
updated
hop through this
schedule?
quick?
Do you want, we started with this page, which kind of just gave us that criteria, which we've adjusted to the 6,113 population. And then we kind of went through on these next slides, basically the alternatives that you presented at our last meeting. And basically just broke those down into a form where we kind of see where we were still needing, and I gave some pros and cons and some staff recommendations for those, but I think what we spent most of our time on last night were some of the recommendations moving forward. Almost there. So these were just basically 3 different levels of maybe some negotiation and talking points. And staff recommendation was kind of this option B, which kind of used, and if you kind of look at the detail I put in this type, it's pulling from your alternate type and which alternate you put together. So kind of trying to match what gave us the acreage that was kind of our goal target for those. Acknowledging the greenways, acknowledging those 8 pocket parks that were kind of at the end of the alleyway or end of those blocks to get us to that desired 33.6 acres. In alternate A, you had included Slate Creek and Community Park kind of in that expanded format, which exceeded the goal by 14.4. So I included those in there too, obviously, because I gave some more parkland. And then the regional park, I credited that 12.38 acres that you had in there for like that sports farm, which was kind of on that west side that you were talking about. And we also counted that again for the special use facility. So, but then that would still leave a need of 27.6 acres to get to that reduced goal. We actually reduced it from 46 to 40. And whether that's right or wrong, that was just a recommendation that Angela and I had kind of come up with. So do you want me to continue to go through C, or do you kind of want to land on this one?
No, that's where council landed on this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So this is what needs to be discussed in the week ahead
Right,
internally.
right.
Okay, when, if you can send us that, that'd be really helpful.
Yeah, I'll definitely compare this to what you guys sent over last night and kind of see how close we are on those numbers.
And, some of our conversation revolved around, the 5% grade. And, so this is a 5% grade, you're gonna have stuff that's everywhere in between. But how do you, and it's in this, it's how do you tier it? So that we get the acreage we need, but maybe it's in 2 tiers or 3 tiers, it's not all just flat land. We talked about how, parking can get placed in. All things that you guys will talk through, we had a pretty robust conversation last night about all of it. We talked about, the ball fields and parking and, the difference between parking for a sports facility versus parking for fields versus parking for the park, or if there even would be any. So we tried to talk through some of that stuff to try to figure out how we could help with the acreage in any way that we could. So the one thing that is most important, which has been stated all along, more so by you, but at the same point, we need to defend that as well, is that everyone is being served equally. And we want everybody to be served as equally as we possibly can, and there's gonna be give and take everywhere. So we feel that this option number 2 is a really good give and take between the things you're able to do and then us going back and trying to be creative together.
So you'll work on that in the week ahead and hopefully some kind of agreement we reach to see in the draft annexation agreement on those items. Okay,
I'd like to see staff take it as far as they can, and if there's still some points of contention or disagreement, then we can bring it back to the committee of the whole here. See where they.
Yeah, I see the meeting, the neighborhood parks and community parkland stuff is something that we can work on with staff and get that kind of massaged. I think the regional park becomes the negotiating point.
and maybe in the draft
That's right.
annexation agreement, maybe we need to call out some alternatives or, just at least flag it as a discussion point for final negotiations, obviously.
I'd add too, council was sensitive to YVHA's concerns about traffic and impacts to the neighborhoods. So council was sensitive to that. And looking at an alternate location that will be considered.
And especially about on County Road 42 and how we could work with the county on that.
All right, well, let's see how far you can get internally with that in the next week or so, and then we'll take a
Do
look at
anything
the,
about it?
okay. Then we'll take a look at the draft annexation agreement in 2 weeks. See how far we've gotten at that point. Okay? Anything else on the operations, maintenance responsibilities? Anything else on the public safety aspect? Police, fire?
No, just because we're still working through numbers.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Then let's move on to item 3. That's our BRAC agenda topic schedule. We obviously have 2 very lengthy meetings set for our 2 May meetings. I did want to just kind of roughly think about how long we anticipate. I know it's kind of hard to guess. We're covering a lot of material on those meetings, but I certainly would expect those would go beyond noon. Should we tentatively plan on 2, 3? What do you think? 2 o'clock?
Yeah, I think
Two,
Okay. So let's plan on 2 o'clock and taking a no more than 30-minute lunch break in there. So we can keep things moving along. And then the other thing I wanted to ask about, also, it still says June 21st for the potential additional meeting, but I think we'd move that to June 23rd. Says
Right,
June,
in order to get
Right,
you some time.
right.
Yep, June 23rd, a Friday meeting.
So we'll move the June 21 to June 23rd. And then the only other question I had on the schedule, since today we are kind of just doing high-level discussion on traffic, we staff hasn't really had time to go over the 1,000-page plus traffic study yet. Do we need to add in extra time in one of these meetings or at another meeting to really dive more into the traffic discussion? And I'm open to whatever you'd like. I think we would want, if we need to obviously give plenty of time for John and his team to, do some real deep analysis on it. And I don't know if you had any thoughts on it, John, how much time you would need for that.
Yeah, I was gonna suggest, let my staff work with Jason's consultants, and we'll see how far we can take it and get some figures to the point where we think they're close to finalized, and then we'll bring the finalized figures to you guys.
Okay.
And hopefully we can shave a lot of time off the discussion we have to have here in this room.
Okay.
I'm anticipating though that conversation probably won't be till June.
Okay.
Yeah, because we need to take a pretty deep dive into some of these numbers in order to get you to the cost shares that we're about ready to discuss.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think the more productive the conversation is today, the less time we'll have. Or need to discuss it later on.
Okay.
Because it'll probably, I think ideally we'll talk about the structure of how we would, what are the triggers and what are what's the cost share methodology or whatever, and then we go back and crunch the numbers and come back with the answer.
Right.
and go from there.
That's
Okay.
exactly what I'm thinking.
Yeah, okay. So then we'll see how far you can get internally on that, and then we'll bring that to open discussion at some point in June, whether it's the June 7th or June 23rd meeting. Okay. Okay. Good. What else? Any other questions or concerns on the agenda schedule?
The only thing that like Kathy and I had talked briefly about was for the traffic, and if there's anything else we have to like follow up on.
Yep.
Not like saying today, let's do an extra meeting next week.
Mhm.
If we say today we need an extra meeting, doing it 3 weeks out minimum to give staff the appropriate amount of
Sure.
time. So if by middle of May, we're saying we need to do something else, that would be the opportune time to say, hey, we need to do something between the 7th and the 23rd
Yeah,
to give staff plenty of time to prepare for everything. I don't think we can turn something around in a week for any of us.
yeah, and I feel like we're really coming up now on the real meat of the whole discussion. And I think at both of the May meetings, we really need to be kind of aware of how close we are on agreement and alignment on things, or how far apart on certain items. And that's going to help dictate, do we add meetings? Do we add time on, certain meetings, et cetera. So I think we just need to keep checking in on this at every meeting and make sure we're giving the time staff needs and also giving the time that the committee needs to look at everything. So we're kind of running tight on time, as we knew we probably would be.
But we also, I think, are all committed to making it all fall into place and it's going to work.
Right. Yeah. No, that seems right. Okay. Good. Any other comments or concerns on the topic schedule?
Jason, I
Yeah.
just have one quick question. So I only have, for now, the May 10th meeting set for the 5 hours. The rest we have left at 3.
I think we were going to do both of the May meetings as longer meetings.
Okay.
Because we split the stuff.
We're going to be diving into fiscal impact model and going through the nuts and bolts of the draft annexation agreement, which should be, I think we'll probably cover those both meetings.
Okay.
Would be my guess.
I just want to make sure we have a room.
Right? That's important.
Yeah, we'll just take city.
Gary can-
hall.
Is there a concern with the conflict on the second meeting in May? On the
I don't think so.
Okay.
I'm gonna book it now.
Okay. All right. Very good.
We'll move into the community room then. at least.
Right.
Yeah, we can do that too. Okay. All right, thanks, everyone. Prior meeting, we're on item 4 now, communications and public outreach update. So Robin, did you have an update for us today?
Yeah, I can just do briefly, we'll send a written update for your next BRAC meeting at the end of the month. We've continued to do community meetings and community outreach. Went to the morning Rotary, went to Kathy, I went to the Rock County Republicans. We're continuing to do that, and then just trying to set up for the May 4th meeting. So I'm going to meet with Mike Lane after this meeting to talk about the format. We talked about the annexation. We've drafted an annexation fact sheet. Dan's looked at it, and also just want to get Rebecca and Mike's input. So our thought was at the May 4th meeting, we would have an annexation 101, not just talk about parks and rec, but a lot of people have questions of not necessarily the legal process, but it is legal, but just kind of why do we do it? What does it mean? And I have been lucky to get some great feedback about annexations that we've done in the past that a lot of people don't know. I had no idea the Brooklyn neighborhood was annexed, or Fairview was annexed, or my old neighborhood of Fish Creek was annexed in 1973. So we'll work on that. I guess the big question will become then what we talk about Parks and Rec, since we just talked about this, of how far the staff and YVHA are along for what we want to say on Thursday about Parks and Rec. So we may just want to solicit feedback from people, just kind of some of the ideas, because we might not all be solidified by that. So that's kind of what our updates.
Do you want to show some of those proposed alternatives maybe that they've talked about? I don't know.
Maybe,
Yeah.
if we want to get community feedback, we could do that.
I think community feedback is super important on Parks and Rec, especially for the folks that hopefully will attend it, would be hoping to live there.
Yeah, so I would just have to work with staff, Rebecca, Angela, Mike and others to figure out, how can we do that?
Yeah, any other feedback, Robin, you needed on the communications update?
No, just need to work with everybody to make sure that we're presenting accurate information next week.
Okay.
And who do you want, because we have two presentations, one at 4 and one at 6 at the community center. Is there anything particular you want, once you have your presentation set and everything, is there anything else you need from any of us or participation or, we'll invite all of council again to both meetings. I'm sure you'll invite your board members. Is there anything?
Well, I think it would be helpful, it was very helpful when John Snyder was there the last time to answer some, he was sitting there. When you were there the last time to answer some questions and the same for Jason. So I think if I just put a little sheet together, but it's great to have, Gary and Jason there, city council and staff, Emily from our from YBHA side, from the city side, you, John, and obviously Angela, and I'm guessing, it'd be good to have Rebecca there as well.
What about having our respective attorneys?
No, I mean, I think that would be fine if they wanted to be there.
Yeah, and I think that what we'd like to do a little bit differently than, we did it a little bit, but to make sure when we are not so confined like a council meeting. So it's not that we're just taking comments and can't answer. So that was great when we were able to do it last time. So if there are legal questions or other questions, I want to try to position all the staff on the front row so that they can get up and answer questions.
And maybe for purposes of the city and the housing authority, I know you're always welcoming general feedback, but is there any specific feedback that you haven't been getting on certain topics or anything that you would like to specifically ask for from whoever shows up? That might be good to know if you had any specific items you really wanted feedback on.
Yeah, we could put some of the questions, for example, when you put your presentation together, you had like 4 main questions.
Yeah.
For streets, we could do something like that too.
General public comment is fantastic. We're going to have a group of people that are going to stand up and speak as they did the last time. But to try to hone in on more, what do you want in a park?
Mhm.
As opposed to, there's not going to be any water, we can't do this.
Okay.
Just to try to draw out ideas
Mhm.
and suggestions as opposed to this isn't going to work.
And that's kind of what I was getting at. I think it would be great if you had some specific topics or questions to spur some conversation instead of just generally, what do you think about, the annexation? I think that would be probably more meaningful for
Yeah, so,
housing authorities.
so we can all work together, work with staff to
There's
come up
only
with some
2 or
questions.
3, just to generate a conversation. And if people start talking amongst themselves and throwing out ideas, that'd be phenomenal.
Okay, great, okay.
I would add too, I know this is, you can't control this, but it would be nice to have a better balance in the attendees of the town halls of more folks that intend to live in Brown Ranch. If we want that feedback from the residents, it'd be nice if we could get more of them to show up. Not sure how you do that.
Trying,
beer, food.
that challenge is that they're the workforce.
Yeah. Which is why we're having 2 different,
Right, the 2 different times. We're trying and we're doing direct outreach,
Yeah.
but again, it's just.
yeah, I understand
And
that.
we're providing babysitting and other things, but sometimes it's
Right.
the luck of the draw.
Well, we need the feedback from the opponents as well.
Absolutely. But it shouldn't just be no, hell no. It should be, okay, so you don't want this, so give us some ideas. How do we draw them into a conversation that we could get ideas from someone who is opposed to it, as opposed to just no, hell no.
Okay.
And the other piece is, and I don't know who's responsible for this, but the PA system with the echo was horrendous.
I think we got it fixed.
Thank you, because that just creates havoc.
I've had other meetings there with horrible acoustics, so not my favorite meeting, but not my favorite place, but it is, it's for a lot of community members, they feel it's a lot more accessible.
All right, any other feedback for Robin on communications? Thank you. All right. Then let's move to our current discussion today, which is the item 5, traffic impacts and infrastructure. As I understand, staff received the traffic study on Friday. Pretty lengthy document, but you're going to need some time to really dive into that. But today, John, I was going to turn it over to you. We're going to try to have a high-level discussion about methodology and how we kind of think about cost sharing and things like that associated with traffic.
Correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, thank you. I appreciate the time, everybody. So the challenge we have is that any development of any size anywhere creates some form of negative impact on the transportation system, just by the very nature of additional trips being added to the system. So the question therefore, as municipal officials, is how many additional trips can the system handle before it needs to be upgraded? What do those upgrades entail? And then how do we divide out the cost for those upgrades? So then today's discussion is really going to focus on offsite transportation infrastructure. It's not intended to address the system within the development itself. So just to make everybody's expectations clear on that. Just for everybody's reference, and we can come back and forth to this, this is a general map of the system that we're going to be talking about. The analysis focused on Highway 40 and some of the other collector roads on the west side of town up to downtown. We stopped our analysis at downtown because downtown, for all intents and purposes, is built out and there's nothing more you can do. So the study focused on everything from County Road 42 to 13th Street. It's not hard to predict what the capacity improvements are that we need to do. Here is a list of 7 different intersections that at some point in the future are going to require capacity improvements. And when I'm talking about capacity improvements, what I'm talking about is getting more cars through the intersection, okay? We're not necessarily talking about lighting or pavement or sidewalks, things of that nature. We're talking about how do we get more vehicles through that intersection. So looking at these 7 intersections, Highway 40 and Elk River Road was expanded back in 2018. So we're pretty good there. About all we really have to do is put in an additional westbound lane through that intersection at some point in the future. Downhill Drive Highway 40, we have that project just about to final design. We have the right-of-way acquisition just about finalized, and then we're turning it over to CDOT. And CDOT's going to be putting that project out to bid this winter for construction, hopefully over the next 2 summers. That project will put in 2 town-bound through lanes and 1 westbound through lane, but we're building it so that it can be easily expanded to 2 westbound through lanes. So first 2 projects, not too daunting. The third project is basically the gateway into Brown Ranch. That is the access right across from Sleepy Bear. We'll have to take a stoplight and then at some point in the future, probably 2 through lanes in each direction on Highway 40. Oh, I lost my screen share. So I think this. Okay. Keep going here. So moving on to County Road 42 and Highway 40, the school district recently put in a traffic signal there. So that buys us quite a bit of time before we have to improve that intersection. But at some point that will probably also have to have 2 through lanes in each direction on Highway 40. Then we have Elk River Road and Downhill Drive. We don't think a traffic signal is going to be necessary there. We think it mostly involves adding auxiliary turn lanes. Then we have Gossard Parkway Downhill Drive, which is currently where Downhill Drive makes the big curve. We'll probably have to do something there as traffic increases and maybe it's an all-stop intersection, something along those lines. And then lastly, out there at Gossard Parkway and County Road 42 as Brown Ranch builds out. The other thing that needs to happen is highway widening, and we've got this broken out into 4 different segments that we think kind of makes logical sense in how you would step through the process. Right now, Highway 40 is 4 lanes east of Dream Island Plaza. So we're really focused on widening Highway 40 west of Dream Island Plaza, kind of in these 4 increments. Now, the traffic impact study does analyze when these improvements need to be made. One of the underlying findings throughout the traffic study is that we need to widen the highway whether Brown Ranch happens or not. So Brown Ranch would certainly accelerate when those widenings would need to occur, and they certainly contribute to the need for the widening, but the widening needs to happen regardless. Some of the improvements, especially as you get closer to downtown, need to happen by 2030, maybe 2035. And then as you get farther out west, it stretches to maybe 2045, 2050. So that's one of the things that we want to step through in the next month is really nailing down when we think those improvements need to happen so that we can start to plan financially. Speaking of planning financially, there are 2 established methodologies for how we would divide up the costs for shared projects. And when I'm talking about shared projects, I'm talking about the projects where there's a multitude of different developments driving the need for the actual improvement. So this first method is commonly referred to as no adverse impact. This is what we used in the Steamboat 700 methodology. And kind of the thought behind this is that the developer has to do whatever the developer has to do to keep the level of service in the network the same as it currently is. So it basically says, here's our background level of service, here's our background traffic. It has to stay the same. So it requires a substantial amount of investment on the on behalf of the developer because it doesn't really take into account any contribution from background traffic. This second methodology called incremental impact is what we used in the Bryn-Gray annexation. And this is what we say, this is when we say, okay, here's the background traffic at a given road segment or a given intersection. Here is the traffic the developer is putting through that particular segment or intersection. Therefore, your contribution has to be commensurate with your traffic. So 2 different methodologies, no adverse impact and incremental impact. And this is probably the big discussion that we need to have near the conclusion of this presentation. In addition to projects with shared costs, there are projects that the way we currently do it in the city, the developer would be solely responsible for. And this usually is related to access points. Brown Ranch has a primary access point already under development, and that's Gossard Parkway, which the city and the county partnered on, and then Overlook is going to finish up this year. So that will take care of one of Brown Ranch's primary access points. The other 3, we have Highway 40 and Slate Creek Road. We have Gossard Parkway and County Road 42, and some road to be named later intersecting with County Road 42. Typically, we would require the developer to fully fund the costs of all their access points. Other considerations we have to think of, County Road 42 from Highway 40 to Brown Ranch's northern intersection. At some point, the county may come to us and say, is this going to be a county road or a city street upon annexation? I don't know that we necessarily need to develop a position on that today, but should this become a city street, then we as a city would require Brown Ranch as the developer to upgrade County Road 42 with multimodal improvements. County Road 42 currently has 1 lane in each direction. We don't anticipate needing to add additional lanes to County Road 42, but we should add multimodal improvements such as bike lanes and sidewalks that we can flesh out the details through the development review process. And then one other consideration here, the Steamboat 700 annexation, the West Steamboat Springs area plan, and the transportation master plan envision at some point in the future a connection up north of the airport to County Road 129. It's a heck of a lot of road for comparatively little traffic benefit because you don't have a heck of a lot of traffic going from north route to west route and back and forth. So what we are proposing right now is that we don't require construction of this northern connection with the annexation because it is so much road and because there is comparatively little traffic benefit. But we do set ourselves up in the future for, someday in the future where maybe we need to see it happen, that we at least dedicate right of way to that northern property boundary, linking up with one of your collector roads that's already sketched out. And then this would be consistent with the CDC where we do require extension of roads to neighboring properties. So those are the other considerations. When we talk about funding possibilities for Highway 40, as a starting point, we always explore every grant opportunity we can possibly explore. So up here are kind of 5 different categories of grants. Federal stimulus, you're lucky if you get it, but it's certainly not something to hang your hat on. The faster safety grants and the hazard elimination grants are available when you have safety problems, when you have a history of accidents. Thankfully, we don't have a history of accidents, but unfortunately, that means that we probably are not good candidates for those grants. The Multimodal Options Fund is out there, but it is primarily for anything other than cars. So we're talking bus stop improvements, sidewalks, bikeways, things of that nature. So that really doesn't help us expand the throughput on the highway. And then you've got DOLA mineral severance grants. I put all this up here just to state that while we will continue to explore every granting opportunity, we as a municipality do not anticipate receiving grants for widening Highway 40. Now, the Housing Authority, in contrast with your relationship with the governor's office and things of that nature, you might have more of an ability to obtain grants for highway widening than we as a municipality have. Other funding possibilities, CDOT through their regional priority program. When we talk about Highway 40 improvements, we're talking about numbers that are so large that they probably don't happen without a substantial level of involvement from CDOT. So we would be counting on CDOT to help us make this happen. We do have the city CIP that can help to a modest amount. As a lot of you know, there's a tremendous amount of pressure on the city CIP. And the numbers we're talking about for transportation improvements on Highway 40 are so large that while the city CIP can maybe assist here and there, it's certainly not going to carry the day on any of these projects. And then lastly, of course, we have the contributions from the Housing Authority, perhaps through STR tax revenue. And that is the option that we typically would not have. So key questions that I want to open up to the group at this time, if it's okay,
Sure.
is what cost assessment methodology are you comfortable with that we can start putting in the annexation agreement for those projects with shared costs?
Okay. I mean, is there any proposal from your part on that, or?
We felt comfortable with the incremental impact.
I believe that's how our traffic study analyzed it as well, right, Jeff?
It anticipated that.
Yeah. I mean, that seems to be the fairest approach, recognizing that Highway 40 it serves a lot of different needs, not just Brown Ranch, but people commuting in from elsewhere. When I-70 is closed, it becomes I-40, all of that. I think that's, from our standpoint, I think that's the fairest way to do it.
Right. The only caveat for us is, once we get through all of this, to ensure that we agree on the numbers. Once we all agree on the numbers, then whatever that calculation is what it is.
Yeah, and I think, that part of going back to the slide that John just provided, I think the real, significant opportunity there is that since Brown Ranch is dedicated towards delivering 100% affordable housing, it can open the door for utilization of STR tax funds for, the local contribution related to this that hopefully can advance CDOT funding and get these improvements done in a timeline that really works for the community and that benefit spreads well beyond Brown Ranch.
So it sounds like we're in agreement then on the incremental impact approach.
And that's a big deal. This was 3 meetings of discussion with Brent Gray. And we're all kind of unified in our thought that this is the best approach here and that really launches us forward.
Okay. Great. Good. Okay.
Second question, are you comfortable with staff's recommendation that Brown Ranch is 100% responsible for these 4 items, the 3 access points, and then should County Road 42 become a city street, multimodal improvements along that county road?
Okay. Any concerns on that from Housing Authority?
We had anticipated paying for those particular things with the exception of the multimodal improvements. I don't think we had sort of anticipated that, although it's fairly late in the development phase. I guess the thing that we didn't contemplate was the fact that County Road 42 is actually the right of way for that. It was not a right of way. It's actually an easement on Brown Ranch property.
For part of it.
For part of it, yeah. And so when annexed into the city, it becomes a city street. Is that the?
It's certainly within city limits.
Yeah.
Which would imply city maintenance, and it's a segment. So if you go from Highway 40 north, you're on a segment that would not be on Brown Ranch property, and then you enter Brown Ranch property, and then you leave Brown Ranch property. So there would be this segment that would be within the annexation boundaries.
Yeah, and it seems that it, with development in that zone, I wouldn't say that immediately upon annexation that it should be adjusted, but as adjacent development occurs, that would make a lot of sense, and that would be required through the city's code anyway.
Yeah, there's some nuance to this in that we wouldn't necessarily want to put multimodal improvements along that road unless there was something somewhere for those people to go, because we just don't want to dump them out onto an unimproved Highway 40 where they don't have shoulders to safely operate on.
Right.
So if there was some sort of school amenity or park amenity, or if Highway 40 was widened by then we would want to kind of extend those improvements. So there is some nuance that we work through the development review process.
Yeah. And is that something, I guess the question, how much do we need to address this with specificity in the annexation agreement?
It depends on whether or not the county commissioners come and ask us to take that road.
But they could also ask later when we're done with this.
They could.
Right.
I was thinking it could be a part of the development review process. When I look at that sort of thing, it seems like it would show up on the plat, dedication of right of way on the plat and transfer of title formally through a separate process.
And then we have to find out who is financing the improvements.
Right.
When and if those improvements are warranted.
Right, and I'd add, I think there's a better, and I agree totally. My history of grants, decades of grants, never was successful getting grants for a road. Multimodal, it opens, at least cracks the door open a little bit, but trying to get grants for a road, not much luck there. So I think the assumption that we cannot rely upon grants for road improvements is a safe assumption. If we happen to get assistance from the federal and state government, great, just consider that a bonus. And I think you're right. If we can come up with some matching funds or something to help advance that in their plans, that can help accelerate the schedule.
Yeah, I guess our position is that to the extent that we're not deviating from the post sort of annexation processes, there's no reason to put it into the annexation agreement. Because you have an existing regulatory framework that would require all of these things.
Well, maybe. So the first 3, yes, but the multimodal improvements, one side of the road would be your development, the other side of the road would be county land. So that's why I would like to discuss this now is if we're talking about putting sidewalks and bike lanes on both sides of the road, who covers the other side of the road? I mean, yes, well, and especially as you get close to Highway 40, because I think that first parcel to the east is school. Yeah. So it may not even be adjacent to your property.
But that's what you're talking about with multimodal bike lanes,
Right.
Sidewalks,
Yep.
trails.
Yeah, and it's, oh, that's kind of an interesting one, because the core trail or multimodal trail as it's conceived runs essentially along the south boundary of our property.
Yeah.
And then would likely fly over County Road 42 with some type of bridge or something along those lines. There's some grade there that makes that pretty possible. And then it just sort of, that's the end of it, right? Like, I think the question is where does our responsibility end? Typically speaking, it would be getting it to the adjacent property, right?
Right. Yep.
And so your question on multimodal is who handles the westbound side of, or west side of.
West and east on each side of County Road 42, should it become a city street.
And it would it be enough to just reference that those multimodal improvements will be paid for in accordance with the CDC as it exists at that time?
I don't think the CDC would speak to something like this.
Because it's not gonna be on site, right? Is that?
Some of it could be on site, but a lot of it could be off site.
Mhm. Okay,
I mean, that seems like a phenomenal use of the SDR funds to improve upon infrastructure related to affordable housing.
We could
That's an option.
put this in a spreadsheet of potential use of STR funds.
Yeah,
And then come June, we'll probably have a long list of
right.
potential uses. And then we have the hard task of saying, what can we afford?
right.
Dan, did you get that one?
I'm sorry, I missed that.
On a spreadsheet of potential uses of STR tax dollars, let's throw County Road 42 multimodal improvements on it.
Okay. But I did hear from the Housing Authority, they have no problem with the first three, for sure.
And we'll talk through this last.
And we'll talk through the multimodal improvements for 42.
Great.
Okay.
And then, are you comfortable dedicating right-of-way from one of your collectors to your northern property boundary for a potential future connection up to County Road 129?
I think what we would likely do is kind of what we've done with the Mid Valley project, which would provide some type of blanket easement that could be convertible to right of way when we know which road, you know what I mean? Because like at the moment, we just don't know exactly where that would be located. So it would probably serve us better to just say it can run through this 100-acre piece of property.
With the location TBD.
Location TBD. Because, this sort of plays in a little bit to the conversation about, some expansion of County Road 42 up to that northern parcel and the regional park and all of that, I think, requires flexibility. And we'd be happy to provide the flexibility needed to make that happen.
Yeah, no, blanket easement works very well.
Good. Any other concerns on those two questions? Okay.
Going back to the incremental impact discussion, we should probably have a discussion on the timing of payments for these shared costs. You got 4 general alternatives. One would be upfront, that annexation. You could go prior to each phase. You could go at development approval for a given proposal, or you could go at building permit approval. The way we would currently do it for projects already within the city is that these payments would be made at the time of development.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Usually we would pay it before building permit. Is that right?
You think, Rebecca?
Those sound like the same thing to me. What do you,
Well, I guess the point would be, it would be due at, when you say development approval, that would be like city council approves. It would be a condition of the development approval paid at building permit.
So for some of your current projects, it's kind of one and the same. But if you have, say, a tract subdivision where you're gonna subdivide it up into lots and those,
Oh,
they're gonna
right.
start coming in a staggered fashion.
Right.
You don't wanna hold up the first person from building their house.
Right, understood.
Yeah, so it
So
would
it'd be
be
preliminary plat,
at
or final plat.
prior recording of the final plat. Or if it was tied to, say, a commercial or multiple family development or something like that, then it could be prior to building permit. It'd be one of those two triggers.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's, any concerns on that?
So we're looking at either C or D and talking through that.
Depends on the type of.
Depends on the type of development we're
Yeah.
talking about.
So that can all get put into good language.
Right.
Okay.
But you're comfortable with C or D depending on the circumstances?
It isn't, hey.
Since we can't make progress in
Right.
3 5 years.
So next steps for us behind the scenes is my staff and I will continue to review and vet the traffic impact study. We will work closely with Jason and his consultants to develop a table that identifies the cost of these projects, the timing of when these projects likely need to happen, and then the percent contributions from the housing authority. And then lastly, not that we have doubts about the traffic study, but being that we have millions of dollars writing on this, we think it's appropriate to get a second opinion. So I am going to ask Bill Fox with Fox Tuttle to perform a peer review of the traffic impact study. And then we can circle back around with Carrie McDowell and have a discussion and hopefully come to a good conclusion so that we are all convinced that the assumptions going in are as good as they can be.
So do you think that peer review will allow us to hit a June discussion point?
I think so. I think so, yeah. I reached out to Bill yesterday and I owe him a follow-up phone call today, and I think we can get it done.
So it's a review, they're not doing a whole other traffic studies. Okay,
Correct.
cool. Because those are expensive, it turns out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we still have quite a bit of work in front of us in order to identify to this group what we think those costs are gonna be. But with this discussion, I think we made a lot of progress.
Any
But
other
with that,
feedback you were looking for today?
that's the feedback that I need, but if anybody has any about what we think needs to happen, we're available and we're happy to answer those.
I have a couple.
Yeah.
Within the study that we did that anticipate the two project, or I'm specifically interested about downhill?
Mhm.
That's already what I'll call earmarked and ready to be funded. And so was that in the total cost, do you remember?
So the traffic study, I don't think attempted to put estimates on any of the costs.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're not expecting that to be on our side. That's something that the city has planned and funded or expects to fund.
So there's two parts to that. The city and CDOT are mutually funding, with CDOT being the majority financial partner, the construction of that intersection over the next 2 summers. But probably 15 to 20 years out, we may, or maybe even sooner, I don't know, but we probably have to ask Carrie. We'll have to add an additional westbound through lane through the intersection that we're about ready to build. But we are building it in such a way that there's room to put it so that it's not a huge effort.
So it would be, the scope of that would be part of the widening, not the intersection improvements. Okay.
Okay, my other question is, you made a comment about there are certain improvements we're gonna have to do to US 40, whether Brown Ranch is built or not.
Yeah.
And I did not have the time to go look at the 6-year CIP.
Mhm.
What are the other things that the city is already, what are the things on your radar over those 6 years?
The biggest one for us is Indian Trails Highway 40. We are intending to signalize that intersection. That is not included in this analysis because that is entirely meant to help the side street traffic off of Indian trails. It's not meant to adjust the throughput on Highway 40. So that's why I didn't mention it in the context of Round Range.
Okay,
And that's also being designed for 4-lane throughput.
Well, not necessarily. The thought, because of the topographical challenges there, we didn't think it was realistic to be able to design it for 4 lanes in each direction and get it done with city CIP dollars. We thought it would have to be expanded with the widening that occurs from Dream Island Plaza to Elk River Road.
okay, those were my 2 questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other questions for John?
A lot of the sort of traffic study stuff focuses on level of service for people driving cars. And one of the things that we're sort of really focused on is making sure that we have a very good human experience. Not that the cars have feelings, but the people driving them do. I think as the core trail expansion work that we're doing is really critical. I guess my question is as we do these widening projects, I know there's going to be some multimodal component to that. Is there an opportunity to create some priority for bus transit or things like that as we're widening what is now we have an opportunity to add lanes, and do you have an opportunity to kind of give priority to the bus in that scenario?
And bike.
Yeah.
bike lanes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, and an example of that is there is a bus only lane that utilizes the shoulder. That is along Highway 40 coming downtown bound from Hilltop into 3rd Street. And that shaves several minutes off of our loop during peak hours. So that is something we would love to vet with any highway widening.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think it would be awesome. I mean, they've obviously done that with RAFTA in the Glenwood Canyon or in Roaring Fork Valley. And I think it's really pretty powerful to be sitting there in a line of traffic and then have the bus blow by you. So that would be something that, I mean, I don't think we're going to put that into this agreement, but I want to make sure that that's a priority moving forward. I know it's within all of the city's master plans and all of that to prioritize transit. But as we're thinking about that, like creating an opportunity to really incentivize the types of multimodal shifts that we want to see.
Okay. Very good. Any other feedback or questions for John?
This has been very productive.
That was good. That was,
Really wonderful.
I like that when we have the pointed questions. It seems to help
Easy.
things progress. But that's good. A lot of agreement there. Okay, nothing else on traffic impacts right now? Okay. Thanks, John. Appreciate that. Okay, for our next meeting, we have a huge agenda. We have 4 items coming up to really focus on. We'll hear from the Housing Authority on some more details on the affordability and attainability of housing, which I assume is going to include discussions on deed restrictions, things like that.
Yeah, that will, we don't have sort of a finalized deed restriction, and I think that we want to retain a little bit of flexibility in crafting deed restrictions over time that match either the funding mechanisms that we're looking at and or just change our sort of shared experience with them over time. But we'll be providing sort of the basis for affordability and the sort of methodology that we intend to utilize to maintain affordability long term.
Okay. And then we'll get a discussion on sustainability measures you plan to implement as part of the development, which you've referenced before. Sounds like you have a good commitment to that. And then probably the 2 biggest items, which I know everyone really wants to see, the draft annexation agreement, which will be full proposal from the Housing Authority, and then the draft fiscal impact analysis model that the 2 economist firms have been working on between the city and the Housing Authority. I'd really like on the annexation agreement part, as I said, we're kind of coming down to crunch time. I think I'd like to focus first and foremost on where we have agreement on terms with, and that we don't really need to spend a lot of time, figuring out, which items we really have unanimous agreement on, and then we can kind of hone from there on the really big critical negotiation points, which hopefully we could really hone in on which items we agree on at this meeting, and then start discussing and then continue discussing into the second May meeting, the items that still need to be ironed out in the annexation agreement. That's how I would envision this going. But I'm open for feedback.
No, just the thought I had is when we had done a sustainability report a few weeks back, anything green meant we were there, and anything red meant we weren't. And even if it's just the number or the first word or highlight in some way to say, this is where we're in agreement and this is where we're talking through and it's yellow and then red. I don't know, but that would be a great way, because then members of the public can watch our progress as we go from maybe it's half and half and then it's, just a way for all to say, oh, I don't have to read that paragraph again.
Right.
Yeah, I think a green, yellow, red is a fine sort of, I guess, just indicator.
Right. Okay.
It worked. It was very powerful for us with the cat.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a way to keep things focused. So we could do that for sure. Okay. And then fiscal impact analysis. This obviously is going to be hugely important. And of course, we need to, see the presentation. There may be some questions from this group about questioning the assumptions, getting some understanding around the assumptions, because that really is obviously driving the full fiscal analysis. And then, that's really where, in conjunction with the annexation agreement, that's where we're going to get down to the cost and the cost sharing on both the capital side and on the operations cost, and how that works and who's going to be responsible for what and how it could possibly be paid for, which that really, that sounds very, very simple, but I think that's really where the rubber meets the road, and it's where we're going to have our most impactful discussions, I would say.
And you have experience in that.
Yeah. So we'll see, but that's, I think everyone's looking forward to seeing that fiscal impact analysis and have some real meaty and meaningful discussions. We've introduced a lot of topics up to this point, had some good conversation, but I think seeing those two documents together is really going to help drive conversation and allow us to ask those pointed questions so we can really get the progress that we need.
Yep, and I think we'll be kind of looking at it just from a fiscal impact analysis, looking at it both on the operational side, so the general fund impact, and also on the capital side, because we obviously just today, we talked about, John didn't want to probably provide any particular numbers, but very large amounts of capital projects. And so that's one conversation, and there's revenues and there's expenses associated with that. And then the operating side is obviously another thing, and we're trying to make sure we don't commingle those as much as we can.
Yep. Okay. Any other feedback or questions on our next meeting?
That we have a comment that has come up twice now in this session that I wanted to go out to everyone. We're getting the question about live work units. Some semblance of industrial in the community, whether it's an artist, it could be anybody, anything. And was there any consideration at all, especially maybe it's more forward where you're laying out commercial units and such, not to have a conversation today, but for something for you guys to go back and have a conversation on and come back to us. We have council members that would be very interested in just talking through that.
Okay, yeah, and I think that ultimately is a question of kind of post-annexation land use. So one of the things that will be, one of the annexation items will be a regulating plan, which will essentially zone the property. And what are the allowable uses within that, those zoning districts, right? Live work is definitely a component that was conceived of and talked about in our development plan. I haven't verified whether that's allowed in the particular transect zones that we're looking to utilize. However, we also have the opportunity to amend that zoning. The city's going through a concurrent process to amend that zoning So we could make it an allowable use through, whatever process we think is appropriate. And then we essentially open the door for that being a reality.
Well, I just, we've had it brought up and just if you guys could, talk about it, get back to us.
Okay. Yep.
Anything else on the next meeting? Any questions, concerns there? Okay,
It's gonna be a big one.
it is.
Very long meeting.
That will be a long one and
Make sure-
very important.
Should we make sure we have coffee?
Good coffee today.
Yeah.
It's right here waiting for you.
Yeah, both of the May meetings, I think, are gonna be really, really important.
We'll probably do the same thing for lunch, something similar, just
Yeah.
get sandwiches that people can pick and choose and some chips.
Okay,
Excellent, that sort of stuff. If that works, if
Yep.
you get tired of it, let us know. We'll mix it up.
yeah,
It just keeps going on.
okay,
I don't know why. I'm so sorry.
that's all right. Okay, well, if nothing else on the next meeting, then I'll open things up for public comment.
Jason, before you.
Yeah, sorry, Tom.
They put some security measures on,
Okay,
so if people are online that they want to speak, they have to raise their hand and they have to
Okay.
be let in, so you might want to just.
okay.
I was asking if you could just. mute
I'll announce
all.
that. Yeah. Okay. All right, public comment is scheduled for 30 minutes and it shall begin at 11:30 a.m. or the conclusion of the above agenda items, whichever comes first. Those addressing the committee are requested to identify themselves by name and address. All comments should not exceed 3 minutes and all comments shall relate only to topics of discussion on today's agenda. Anybody in here for public comment? Jim?
No.
No public comment? Member of the public here today? Anybody online, if you are interested in making public comment, please click the raise your hand button. And we can open it up for you to make some comments. Anybody online for public comment? I don't see anybody raising their hand. Okay,
They may need to be actually let into the meeting.
everybody is in that's trying to get in right now. Got it. So nobody for public comment. Okay. So then I will close public comment. Thank you, everyone, for a productive meeting, a short one, but a productive one today. And I can guarantee you the next two will not be as short.
Yeah.
So
A softball before.
thanks for your time. We're adjourned.
Well,